session today, which is the IAASB. Welcome, Billy. It only seems like, I think a few weeks ago when we had our first meeting. This is our second meeting of the 85th PIOB session. Trust everybody has had a good break and ready to go in the new year. As we are about to start the IAASB, Tom, I should mention that we had a session earlier where we had the observation memo, so we got to appreciate how the December meeting went. And we will be looking forward to an update that you will be giving us today. But feel free to touch on any other points that you think are important. But we look forward to your submission. I think let me hand over to you, Tom. And then the board members would come in at the end of your presentation, comments, questions, and the like. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Seho. And good morning to everyone from the frozen tundra of the Washington, D.C. area. Winter's definitely in full force here. I spent whatever free moments I had yesterday chipping ice away. We had like 6 inches of snow and then 2 inches of sleet and then another inch of freezing rain on top of it. So I got my exercise and calories burned yesterday. So that, in many ways, that's a good thing. And most importantly, I didn't injure myself in the process. As we get older, that's the big risk. Well, 2026 is off to a great start for us, and we're extremely busy already. And I just wanted to give you a sense of a couple of things before we go into the specific topics. First of all, and I've said this to you before, is that our work plan transition is in full force right now. While we may not be creating many major new standards for this year, we're not letting up by any means. We're busy and focused on areas of big impact, and obviously in the technology area, that means audit evidence and risk response, where we've talked about this quite a bit with this group previously, and we're going to talk about quality management today. But also it's all of our support and maintenance of existing standards, whether that's through the LCE project, which we'll discuss, or post-implementation reviews, or 5,000 support as well. The other thing is that the engagement with our stakeholders is very much a key priority. We've already had some great engagement, in-person engagements in Europe. I was in Paris and Brussels and the UK recently. And we're also conscious and sort of waiting a little bit of recent remarks by the SEC chief accountant as well. And we'll figure out how we can navigate some of the opportunities, but also make sure that we stay focused on our core standard setting objectives. So happy to talk about those matters, but I'm going to focus on the 3 topics that you raised for us to talk about today. My goal is to be pretty brief in addressing them so we permit conversations. And Chair, if you would like, we can pause at each one. So to permit focused conversation, or I could go through them all at once too. It's up to you. Okay. So change the page. So we're going to turn to the technology quality management workstream. Just a reminder to you that our technology quality management workstream is one of the 3 areas of targeted work on technology. First area, as I said, is audit evidence risk response. Second area is this quality management workstream, and then a number of discrete efforts, including the 500 series project that we're going to deal with from a technology mindset. The QM focus is really on how technological tools are approved, whether they're developed or procured, how they're monitored and integrated into engagements, how human oversight needs to be maintained, and how risk specific to emerging tech tools are identified and then mitigated. We've had this ongoing hypothesis that guidance will be the right place to start, and we could build off the principles of ISQM1 and ISO 220, and that may be the most agile way to get through the work and most helpful to the marketplace as practices take hold. So to test that hypothesis, we held 8 roundtables throughout the world. You're seeing on this sheet, this slide right here, how broad they were in terms of reaching out to a range of participants, going beyond just the practitioner community, but also including regulators, users, preparers, and others. This is the formal way we got input in eight different roundtables. We've largely partnered with national standard setters or accountancy bodies to get these going. And I think we got great feedback. And let's turn to the feedback that we got. So first, the idea is that technology is moving rapidly from the experimentation phase, particularly in the world of AI. And if we don't move quickly, we could very well find ourselves behind the time. Then we turn to the second big point is, how we ask practitioners and others how they're seeing QM1 and 220 applied in the marketplace. And, what we hear is we think that they're getting the core principles are conceptually robust, but what they're having trouble, or there may be some diversity of practice, is operationalizing those standards for the tools, particularly when the tools from AI are opaque and probabilistic. And so, what they would like is some consistency in terms of how regulators will enforce the application of these standards. They would like to ensure consistency across firms in terms of this, and some ability to gauge what best practice would be. And then we got 2 other sessions during our roundtables, if you flip the slide. And this really was what should we do about it at the board? And remember, working hypothesis was guidance. And really, so we got some push not only to focus on guidance in the near term, but where to focus the guidance around. And the focus in our mind had always been on governance, and that's really sort of where we're being told to governance of the tools, clear accountability across the tool lifecycle, how they're approved, how they're used, how they're monitored, and how issues that arise are being remediated. We're really not being told to get into full rule book approach to this, but focus on the suitability, whether the tool is being applied for the given purpose. And really, what stakeholders told us is lean into this quickly, and maybe in a topic-specific manner, and don't try to create one giant omnibus guide for how to use AI tools. So one last thing I'd like to point out, and this is Gabriello would probably be entirely aligned if he's flipped the slide, is that our roundtables, not surprisingly, pointed to a number of ethical dimensions related to quality management. You wouldn't be surprised by this. We're not surprised by it. And the moral of the story is that we will continue to coordinate closely with IAASB on our efforts. And you can see some of the examples here on the slide. So that leads us to conclude that we definitely need to be ready to produce non-authoritative materials quickly on QM-related matters. And at our March board meeting, our staff will bring an action plan based upon what we've heard. Now, I've talked about this in the past, is what is our approach to developing this? And I'm not sure everyone remembers from a few years ago, we set up a framework for activities to govern our process for issuing guidance, and how much board oversight there would be in relation to this. And I think this is a question of, for you, is to make sure, like, if we're going to issue topics and they're going to come close to being more authoritative, what is our process for quality control? How do you know that the materials that are going to be used by practitioners and relied upon by regulators have gone through a robust process to get out the door? And we do have a channel which does sort of require board sign off on this. But we also are considering how we get expertise from external stakeholders who may have more specialized knowledge in this space than members of our board or staff. And so this is what I draw your attention to in this slide. What we think would be useful, at least in relation to this quality management workstream, is putting together a multi-stakeholder expert group that has specialized expertise, say 8 to 10, and this is very much under formation today. That obviously in a staff-driven model, staff would be responsible for driving the development of any materials with board supervision as well. That board would ultimately have to review and deliberate any guidance put out into the marketplace, and we would have some targeted consultation. So it has the closest thing to this approach is, you may remember, we put out the EER guidance, which ultimately became the basis for a lot of what we did on 5000. This is effectively a way of doing a little bit more formality, getting more expertise into the development of non-authoritative materials. And then, because it's transparent, that gives you insights to what we would be doing as well, and the broader stakeholder community. So that is on our mind right now. Nothing has been formalized. We're working through what we think is the best way to develop these materials, but having an expert group to assist us certainly would make sense, and more importantly, having more rigor through the board clearance process also would make sense, consider the critical nature of these materials. So I'll pause there to allow comments on anything related to technology and QM.
Board members, Dave?
Tom, thanks for that update and thanks for joining us today. With respect to this project, I'm going to ask a question, but if I say it in the form of a statement, it'll only be to test whether I'm understanding this correctly. Clearly, we want to understand, you want to understand how auditors are using AI and different forms of AI in executing the audit. It's also important that the IAASB understand how preparers are using AI in the preparation of financial information and how the auditor should address that in the execution of the audit. And I just wanted to make sure both of those aspects were on the mind of the board as you consider, what, if any, sorts of guidance you need to issue.
Yes, very much so, Dave. Like that, those are both the things. Is why we can't sit still is that preparers are actually using these tools in the preparation of financial information, but also auditors are meaning to apply it. Like in this case on QM, obviously it'll have a little bit more emphasis on what's being developed by audit firms themselves. But a lot of that, of course, is in response to what's happened in the preparer community.
Tom, thanks, Tom. The other Tom?
Oh, thank you very much, Tom, for presentation. My question on this issue is that it's a discussion. It should be the discussion among the PIOB ourselves. But is there any idea of the role of oversight in this issue? Because this now will be presented to the IAASB board and then need some sort of the approval of the ISRE board. So some of the PIOB member will participate as an oversight provider. But might be a little bit challenge for PIOB to give a sort of the consistent comment on this issue. So I'm very glad if you have any idea of the role of the oversight in this new development of this new system of NAM. Thank you.
Yeah, so a couple of things, Tom. At this board meeting, we're not just talking about our action plan in relation to the specific non-authoritative material for QM. We are developing a broad framework on how we are going to consider our guidance or actions on technology-related materials. So there's that. So that provides an opportunity for input, obviously, in dialogue with the PIOB. Secondly, there's the approach to the non-authoritative materials, and partly why we're bringing sort of this idea of more formality to the mix. Like, I think the PIOB wants to, most importantly, is concerned that we have a robust process that is keeping the public interest at the center of our work, and that we have significant quality control behind it. And so this is partly why we're bringing this sort of approach and mechanism to you. And then thirdly, since we're going to talk about, to use the jargon of our framework for activities, our Channel 4 type approach which provides great transparency and approval on the guidance, you are going to have full visibility and ability to comment either in forum like this or through your observation of our board meetings on it. So I feel like, yeah, there's no certification process that needs to be, but in fact, that's not the way you solely exercise your oversight responsibilities. We're responsive to everything you say and consider it in due course.
Thank you very much. And at the same time, I personally think that there may be some sort of the necessity for a little bit closer relationship between staff, because this is also the staff-driven model, and maybe some sort of the closer communication between the IAASB staff and the PIOB staff may be more, how can I say, a fit for this purpose for the agile discussion of this issue. It's my personal view. Thank you very much.
It's certainly one we're fully supportive of, and Vili's on the call right now, and he could explain a little bit about how often the teams are in touch. Vili, do you want to have a quick response to Tom's point there?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. And yes, certainly we can, as it is, we engage with the PIOB staff at least on a quarterly basis. But I mean, we can always, as this project gets underway, we are certainly open to have more touch points with them. So we can certainly work on that, Tom. So, and then I obviously fully agree with the other points that Tom has made, including that part of this mechanism will also be that we want to upfront, and that will be apparent in that overarching document that Tom has been referring to, the overarching approach to addressing technology-related matters, is we do want to incorporate the PIF principles. Although this will not be standard setting, we do think the qualitative characteristics of the PIF would still be important to guide our work, even in terms of the non-authoritative materials. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Vili.
Thanks, Tom. I don't see any other hands. Maybe we move.
This is a...
Oh, apologies. Mark's hand just went up.
I just got it in quickly there. First of all, Happy New Year to all of you who've joined us. We look forward to another challenging year. I just wanted to just make a comment about this NAM, and I hear what you're saying about having your own process for the development of NAM, and I think that is great. But we are seeing more reliance on NAM And whilst clearly it's not standard setting and so therefore isn't within the certification process, I am certainly of the view that we need to perhaps working, I don't know, with the monitoring group, formalize more the relationship between the PIOB and both standard setting boards with regard to NAM and our role with regard to oversight of that. So sort of more formalize the contacts and review that we have.
So my only, first of all, Mark, great to see you, and congratulations to Aston Villa so far. I'm sure that's really what we should be talking about right now, other than NAM. But to me, I think the PIOB's general oversight role is robust in this area. Obviously, if we're working outside what the PIOB's view of the public interest is, then I would expect, like, just like a corporate directors would have on management, have an opportunity to push on the as a governance body against us. So I'm not sure how much more formality you need, but I'm clearly very sensitive to that as chair of this board, that this is an important activity of our standard setting body and is subject to governance. And it's not like an extra jurisdictional type thing that we're getting doing off the books. But if we were doing something wrong on this, that we would get pressure from the governance body. And that's why we're hoping to be very transparent about it all.
Thanks, Tom. I see Felipe's hand went up as the man who observed the meeting in December. Felipe?
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Tom. Hello, Willie and James, my holiday season partners in New York. Yeah? It's good to see you again. Yeah.
Good to see you.
Maybe, Tom, you could say a word on the approach and the way you are going to engage a dialogue with different firms to be aware of the way the structure of the governance and the evolution in the area of artificial intelligence and new techs and so on, to accompany the technical evolutions, to have something which is very flexible and agile, and at the same time the way you would address the needs to cover the risks linked to the use of these new tools in the area of activity of preparers, because these are different populations to discuss with different risks.
Yeah. So I think we have many different means by which we're going to get input from the profession. I think that's the much easier one from our standpoint. We would imagine on this expert group that we would have all the major networks on it, in terms of that, and we would hope to have a preparer or two representative body on it as well. We also are closely engaged with the GPBC and the former firm on these technical issues, and do bilaterals with them too. The reason why we do bilaterals time to time is because there's proprietary technological tools at play here. In terms of the preparer community, generally through the major bodies, through our SAC as well, but it is something that we're sensitive to and need to be a little bit more proactive at right now. Sometimes the easiest way to get to preparers is also via the firm sometimes too. So, Philippe, I'm sensitive to that preparer point, it's a little less natural for us because there's not as close a connection. But we know that the two things that are driving it are the technological tools that are being used in the corporate world, and also the tools that are being developed by accounting firms.
Probably, Tom, the preparers has a stronger link with the audit evidence and risk response project, I would say, in this technological risks assessment, in fact.
Yeah. Yes. So I think those are really good points. Okay, should I move on? I was almost kept it to 1/3 for my hour, but we'll go to LCE and maybe grab some time on this. So we're going to turn to the maintenance of the ISO for the LCE standard. We haven't talked about the LCE standard for a little bit, but I think the key question has always been, will people use our LCE standard? It's sort of there was a movie, Field of Dreams, in the U.S. where the line was, "If you build it, will they come?" And I am pleased to say that there is momentum building behind the LCE standard, and it's not dissimilar to what we had for IFRS for SMEs. If you switch the slide, you'll see. Now, recognize this is a relatively small sample of jurisdictions. This isn't a broad IFAC related things. This really data comes from our jurisdictional standard setting group and information coming via that or through other sources. But you could see that within these jurisdictions, there's an initial wave of LCE standard adoption. And exactly as we would have expected, that there would be a leading edge, there'd be a number of jurisdictions that are keeping it under advisement, and then there's others that are saying, not for us now, and we'll wait, and we'll sit on the sidelines for a bit. And that's exactly where we are, but I am pleased that major economies are adopting this LCE standard, and they're telling us to provide them in the near term some stability and certainty in the marketplace around it. So this balance between stability and keeping our standard LCE standard in line roughly from a principal standpoint with the full ISOs has been one of the key balancing acts that we as a board are undertaking. If you flip the slide, you'll see, we'll talk a little bit about it. So the big thing we're trying to do is keep in mind, as the ISO shift, what can we do that keep these standards roughly in line from a principle-based way, but only in dealing with changes that are relevant to the context of an LCE itself, a less complex entity, and how do we make sure that whatever requirement we're undertaking is proportionate? Now, remember, when we started the LCE standard, one of the key elements is like defining what a typical less complex entity looks like. So this concept of relevance and proportionality is probably the most important thing we're trying to keep in mind. And if you go to the next slide, again, this goes to the balance. It's like stability in the near term. How can we use practical solutions and keep the standards aligned? So this is why we're given a little bit of period of stability, a few years before we're asking for any changes. And then how do we minimize the changes to keep it in line with the ISO? So if you go to the next slide, at the last meeting, we approved, of course, any standard setter likes to make things look a little bit more complex. A general approach to the maintenance of the LCE standards, and also specific project proposals as it relates to the recent standards that we approved that happened after the original LCE standard was made, and that includes going concern and fraud, for example. So we approved the project proposal where we're going to consider, the first step is to consider the relevance of the public interest issues of the changes, and then develop a solution that is proportionate in a way. And then at the end, it's almost like a stand back and say whether the proposed revisions to the ISA for the LCE achieve the project objective. And so we would have, just like in normal things, exposure draft, public consultation, outreach, response to feedback, and a final standard. What I would say is that the way I think about it as a board member, this is me, that what we're trying to do is the minimum viable product to keep the standards aligned. Personally, I believe stability in the LCE standard matters, that we should be very conscious of the proportionality elements of this, and do the least that's required to generate change, but keep the standards aligned. Because the tendency of standard setters is always to be risk averse and add more and more. We were very careful in in creating a standard that was proportionate to the LCEs in the first place, and we don't want to effectively balloon the LCE standard as a result of changes in the ISAs. This is not meant to be the full ISAs backdoored into the LCE standard. So that gives a little bit of the mindset. Vili, one last thing. I thought maybe it would be useful for you to comment on the timeline that we're planning on some of our work here.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Happy to do that. Maybe before I get to the timeline, also just building on what Thomas just said, in the approach statement about the maintenance of the ISA for LCE, which will obviously be a statement that has longevity because we intend to undertake maintenance projects as we go along. It is also clear that to achieve that balance that Thomas referred to, we are also very clear that we will stick to the design principles that were set out when we developed the original standard. And those design principles are summarized in the approach statement. So that will sort of be our check. That will make sure, are we keeping to these design principles as we go along and updating the ISA for LCE? And then in terms of the timing, how we've managed to, how we're setting this up is basically that the ISA for LCE revision process starts more or less when the full ISA is complete. This first revision project obviously works a little bit differently because of the 3-year period of stability that we wanted to provide after the initial issue of the ISA for LCE. But going forward, we expect that whenever the main ISAs are updated, we will then start a maintenance project more or less when the main proposals are finalized. Now, the next one, if you think a little bit into the future, the next one's up will be audit evidence and risk response. And shortly after that, the ISA 500 series. So again, in that instance, it may make sense to do those together. But in any case, what we will plan to do is we want to make sure that this process of maintaining the ISA for LCE can leverage fully the work that has been done on the full ISA. So we don't have to redeliberate points, redeliberate positions, etc. So the idea is that when the full ISA goes for approval, at that meeting or the next meeting, we will approve a project proposal for the ISA for LCE, which in practice, depending on whether it lands on a March or June or September or December, will lead to more or less a year lag time in terms of when the ISA for LCE, those updates become effective compared to the full ISA becoming effective, which again, we think is an appropriate balance in terms of stability, as Thomas explained. So that is in short what we will do. But in every project proposal, as in the one that we approved in December, as always, there will be a timeline that is set out in the project proposal itself. Thank you, Tom.
Great, thank you, Vili. So I'll pause here and get comments on our LCE standard.
Thanks, Tom. And I think it's important just to remind everybody that the PIOB did approve or certify the LCs in December 2023. And indeed, 3 years later, we are having the revisions. And therefore, PIOB confirms that support for the start of the revision to align the standards with the main ISOs. But let Dave come in there. I see his hand is up. I'll ask my question after.
Thank you, Chair. Tom, thank you for the update on this. And I do think, while I think that period of stability at the beginning was important, I think, you know, thinking of ISOs for LCE, the ISO for LCEs as a continuous improvement project, just like everything else we do, is important. So I appreciate all of that. I wonder if you could just give some qualitative thoughts on the global adoption of the ISO for LCE. I appreciate the update and the visual that you gave of those who've adopted, those who are considering it and stuff. But I'm also interested in how you feel that adoption's going. Is it meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, not quite there yet, that you're having to work harder at this than others? I'm just wondering.
Thanks, Dave. And Tom, before you, because Dave's question is linked to the one I wanted to also ask, maybe you can take the two of them at the same time. When I looked around the global adoption map, as you have depicted, I noted that in the Europe space, we perhaps have the lowest adopted status to date, even though we do have those under consideration. Would you have any additional insights as to, is it the market that we have, which perhaps has less of the area that this focuses on, or is it for any other reason? Thanks. Then Mark can come in after you, or you want to wait for Mark and then respond?
Up to you. How you like me to do it? Maybe take Mark's comments too, and then I'll respond to both.
That's fine. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Shago. I just had a question really on this notion of stability for the LCEs. Now, it's true that we have this 3-year moratorium on amendments to the standard that was issued a few years ago. But of course, going forward, if the issuance of an ISA is a trigger for amendments to the standard for LCEs, you are of course going to be in a situation where you will have proposed amendments to the standard for LCEs at different stages of their development at any one time. So going forward, you actually won't have stability beyond the initial 3-year moratorium. I mean, does that conflict at all with your view that there needs to be stability on LCEs, or is it just a fact of life that the LCE standard will develop, you know, in the same way as the ISAs develop, i.e. sort of essentially on a piecemeal basis going forward?
Yeah, let me deal with your question first, Mark, and then I'll get to the broader adoption question. I sense from your question you have a lot of sensitivity on the stability front. I'm personally with you on this, and I think there's going to be some art in terms of managing, and Billy alluded to this, like maybe holding some of the changes back to batch things together to provide more stability. I don't think our board is entirely aligned on this point, other than it shouldn't be too long of a gap between the ISAs and the ISAs for LCEs. I think there's a part of the board that would be more inclined to provide longer periods and gathering up, and there's parts of the board that would say that we shouldn't let these periods go too long, because the risk is that people will think it's a lower quality standard. You know, I have a lot of sympathy to gathering things up to it. And I don't think we've entirely resolved that question, other than it shouldn't be too long, and that there's some art to maintaining and balancing these approaches. What I wouldn't want to do is have a succession of annual changes. Anyway, and to some extent, a pause in terms of issuing new standards will help in that regard. But the point is well taken. On the adoption front, I don't know what my full expectations were, but I think we're getting pretty good traction in the markets I would have expected to have the adoption. Now, in Latin America, we see efforts for adoption in Mexico, Guyana, Nicaragua, Chile, Barbados, Argentina, Venezuela. In Europe, we've already seen Sweden, Finland, Norway, Slovakia move to it, and under consideration Bulgaria, Croatia, Switzerland, Poland, and the Netherlands. In Africa, there's a growing number of countries, including major economies, that are adopting, including Nigeria and Kenya, Morocco, for example, and Asia, Oceania, Philippines, New Zealand, India, South Korea, Bangladesh, Thailand, Nepal. So, like, this is not necessarily limited to small economies. We're getting growth. In Europe, there's a little bit of a chill in the air on some of the adoptions, because the CEOB, as you remember from the very start, haven't been an enthusiastic proponent of the LC standard. But in the Nordics and in other areas, that it's under consideration. My hope is, as countries adopt the standard and they see it in place and it working, particularly at the level of smaller statutory audits, then it'll get broader acceptance. But I think we're on track for the level of adoption that you would expect in the first round.
Thanks, Tom. I don't see any other hands coming through. I think it's safe to say we can continue.
Great. So we'll get to the final technical topic that we're up to, which is the revision of ISRE 2410, interim review engagements performed by the auditor. That's a big point. We're very aware of the PIOB's recently issued points on this in October. I think we're pretty well aligned. Remember, the genesis of this project was, first and foremost, is that 2410 was like the load standard that hadn't gone through any clarity initiative, and it was written in the old style and needed to be updated. Beyond the fact that our standards and our thinking have evolved in a number of places, and we wanted to modernize 2410. It was becoming an issue in the marketplace as a result. And so, very much in mind as we do this effort is that we really are seeking to be clear about the work effort requirements, and clear about what the communication of the end product is, that it is a limited assurance engagement, and it is a review engagement, and it should not be confused confused with an audit. One big thing is, I was hoping that some auditor was on this slide going to figure out that we made a mistake. Approval of this is not planned for March 2025. This is for March 2026. So I got a heart palpitation that we need to be doing a lot more work between now and in the past. But yes, we don't have a time machine here. We'll approve it this March. So if you look on the next slide, this is where we're going to in terms of what how we're updating the standard. So 2400 are general review engagement standard. And remember, this is a standalone standard, even though the number conventions sort of may suggest implication. We're drawing on concepts and principles that are relevant to interim review engagement to 2400. We're taking proportional topics from modernized ISAs. And then there have been a lot of jurisdictions who have already updated 2410 since we were so far behind the game on this one. And we're looking to them and their guidance and help to draw upon it. And remember, as I said, we're very clear about the work effort here. This is not an audit, and we're very clear that that we need to be clear to any users of the report that this is a review engagement providing limited assurance. If you go to the next slide, we've identified 10 key areas of work that's the focus of this project and what we're doing. Remember, the big thing is that this is work done by an auditor, and being clear about how you can leverage that work and to assist in the work effort here. It is, again, a standalone effort. One thing I want to draw you to attention to, Philippe probably heard this discussion, materiality always comes up. We're being very clear about the requirements in relation to materiality and how you go about applying materiality at an interim stage. There was a big discussion about how this could be different than the audit, but our point is it's driven by the facts and circumstances of the interim engagement, and that's what the assurance provider will need to do, in this case, the auditor. So drawing your attention to that. I think maybe the most important thing is to focus on the three issues that the PIOB has highlighted to us on the next slide. Group interim review engagements. I think this is a situation very similar to what you raised when we were doing sustainability assurance, and we're trying to take a very similar approach. There was a suggestion at our board meeting is that it should be all left to application material, and that was not the approach of our board, that we need to have a mixture of requirements and application material. We're not going to bring all of 600 into 2410, but the general principles and approaches and really where we're talking about requirements is in planning, including involvement of component auditors, communication among the engagement team, and the consolidation process are areas where we probably need enhanced requirements and then appropriate application material. So you were comfortable with our approach on 5,000, or relatively comfortable. We hope that you'll be comfortable with our approach to the group interim review engagements here. We're being, not surprisingly, a specific emphasis on going concern and fraud. This is very much, both of them, a work in progress. We know we have to enhance the requirements here. And in relation to going concern, we want to have an explicit statement. It's how we get that explicit statement right, considering the language that's in a limited assurance engagement, which it tends to be a negative statement. So making sure that that's useful and not just a form of legalese, but people know what it's saying, is what we're working on right now. So those topics will come back to our board. Obviously, we knew that there's more work. I'm waiting anxiously to see what the teams come up with. I have not reviewed the most recent board papers, and I know the teams are working very hard with amongst themselves and with the board project members as we get up to the March board meeting. So those are two topics on the table where we know that the PIOB has a real interest. So we're moving forward on this project. We expect approval of the ED this year, not last year. And I would welcome any comments you have.
Thanks, Tom. Quickly, let's go to the other Tom. Tom?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Tom, for sharing your update. And then especially mentioning the materiality issue I really appreciate that, because perhaps you have heard that there is a big discussion in Japanese constituency in this issue, because the current Japanese practice is that the interim review is sometimes perceived as the mid-time progress check for the annual audit, but the new 2410 clarifies that the determination of materiality for the interim review engagement is done with reference to the interim financial information rather than annual financial information. So the principle has become very clear, but at the same time, there is a gap between the current practice and this principle. So I think that currently Japanese regulators are soliciting the view of the PAs and the preparers and the investors as well. So I think that this IAASB's discussion is giving a very good impact on the discussion among the Japanese constitution. And then I suppose that the same thing may be happening in other jurisdictions as well, and then will continue to happen after you've published the ED. So I just hope that this good impact or this good communication with each jurisdiction will continue after issuing the publishing the ED. So just I would like to appreciate your efforts, not only on the board, but at the staff level as well. Thank you very much for that.
This is certainly an area we expect to get comment on during the exposure draft period, which, actually, I think we've probably have a diversity of practice throughout the world on this topic. And one of the goals of standards is to bring clarity and consistency in terms of practice. So if that's the result, I think it's a good thing. I believe where we landed is the right place. I don't see any other way to do things in a standalone engagement except on the issue of what you have before you. But we're always open-minded, and we'll hear what practice comes back to us on and other commentators come on. And certainly we want to hear from investors on this topic too, because that's really the mindset that sets the materiality thresholds.
Thanks, Tom. Looking at the time, we have 7 minutes left before Gabriela joins us, but let me go to Mark.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question about something which is very important to users, and that is the understanding of the distinction between reasonable assurance in an audit and limited assurance in an interim review. Obviously, this will be an important part of the communication aspects of this standard. And the last IAASB meeting that I attended back in June last year, there was a lot of discussion around this. And I just would like to ask, what progress has been made in articulating this difference in the standard or in the draft standard, and indeed in the thinking around the draft review report to stakeholders.
I think, Mark, we're very focused on being very clear what this engagement provides and using the report to be very clear about what a limited assurance engagement offers users. You know, I don't think in the standard itself we'll go into full articulation about the differences between limited and reasonable assurance, but we are taking steps in the drafting of the standards to be very clear about limited assurance. And Billy will provide a couple of examples of the actions we're taking.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And Mark, you're quite right. This is a very important area, and also maybe even more so in this project because of the proximity between the two engagements. You know, you've got the auditor of the entity performing the audit, and then in a lot of jurisdictions, 6 months later, the interim review engagement. So from a standard point of view, we have tried to clarify those concepts right up front in the standard in terms of limited assurance, standalone engagement, also the link with the audit. You know, even though the auditor may, in terms of the normal cycle of planning the annual audit, be already starting doing work on the audit while they're also doing the review, making sure that those things are approached with a different lens. This is review work that is required as support for a review conclusion. So we've tried to make that clear in the standards for the practitioners that are using the standard. In terms of the users that will be interested in the product of the engagement, that will definitely be the report. And I think that's probably one of the biggest areas of modernization that we've been doing. You know, since Extant 2410 was issued, a lot has happened on the reporting side in our standards, including the auditor reporting project that we undertook, as well as more recently in ISA 5000, where this was also a very important issue, a very important aspect. So we have made sure that we retain all of that good thinking in terms of being very clear in our language, in terms of the review, that the review has been performed in accordance with ISRE 2410, that a review engagement, you know, the work and the assurance obtained is substantially lower than in an audit. So we're trying to make those distinctions within the review report as well. And we've also changed the structure of the report so that it is more familiar to users. So those are some of the things that we are doing, very conscious that this is a very critical area. And again, I think the exposure period will give us the opportunity to see if we've struck the right balance. And we will certainly make sure, as part of our outreach that we do during the exposure period, is that we particularly target users. And we are about to have our first inaugural meeting of our new user advisory group in February. And I think that group will be a great opportunity for us to make sure that for purposes of this standard, we've got the balance right. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you, Tom. 2 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to share with us?
No, and I'd be happy to. Just the last thing I would say is in the appendix, we included the current state of our work program just as an informational tool for you. In the remaining minute or so, I'm happy to answer any questions on that or any other matter, or otherwise I'll yield the time back to you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to, I think the other board members said it earlier, to you and your board, and definitely Billy and team for the submission that has come through today to keep us up to date, and more importantly, share this in the public session such that it's shared to the wider audience beyond just PIOB. So thank you for your efforts and team.